Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into America's first draft, a story that starts with this incredible declaration of ideals and is followed by a government so full of holes it nearly sank the entire American experiment right from the get-go. Okay, let's start with a document you definitely know, but maybe you haven't thought about it quite like this before. I want you to imagine writing a breakup letter. But you're not writing it to a person. You're writing it to a global empire. And you need the whole world to take your side. Because that's pretty much exactly what the Declaration of Independence was. It was the boldest, most audacious breakup letter in history, addressed directly to King George III. Now, this wasn't just some simple, hey, we're out of here note. Oh no. Think of it more like a press release for a revolution. It was this big philosophical argument for freedom, and it was designed to win over allies, like France, and to get colonists who were still on the fence to join the fight. Okay, so beyond that big, dramatic announcement, what was really in it? What was the actual substance? What were the core ideas that made up this new nation's why? Well, if we break it down, you've got Thomas Jefferson as the main writer, the whole thing gets adopted in Philadelphia, and the why is huge. It was totally strategic. The goal was to pull the colonies together, get some much-needed foreign help, and frame this whole rebellion as a just and moral cause. And you gotta understand, the main argument here was absolutely revolutionary for its time. It wasn't just about taxes anymore. It was about these universal natural rights. The document basically says that governments get their power from the people, and then, and this is the killer part, it just lays out this long list of every single way King George had broken that trust, building a case for a complete and total split. Okay, declaring your independence is one thing. It's powerful, it's inspiring, but then comes the really hard part. How do you actually build a working government from scratch, especially when you're in the middle of a war for your very survival? And this, right here, shows you that huge shift. If the Declaration was the big aspirational why, then the Articles of Confederation was the first and, let's be honest, very flawed attempt at the how. It was kind of like the nation's first shaky prototype for how to govern itself. All right, so let's dig into that first draft, the Articles of Confederation, and see how it tried to make good on the Declaration's big promises and, well, where it all went wrong. You can see here, putting this first government together was a slow, really cautious process. It was drafted just a year after the Declaration, but it took another 4 years for all 13 states to finally agree on it. And that delay, it wasn't just red tape. It showed just how much these states didn't trust each other. Unity was hanging on by a thread. The whole idea was to create what they called a League of Friendship among the states. See, the main goal was just to have enough unity to win the war, but the absolute biggest fear was creating a new, powerful central government. I mean, they had just gotten rid of a king, right? The last thing they wanted was to create an American one. And that fear, the fear of creating a new tyrant, wasn't just some abstract idea. No, it was the driving force behind the whole design of the Articles. Practically every line was written to keep the national government weak and the states as powerful as possible. And this table just lays the problem out so clearly. On one hand, the national government had these huge responsibilities, like declaring war and making treaties, but on the other hand, it had no real power to back it up. It couldn't raise taxes to pay for that war. It could ask the states for soldiers and money, but it couldn't force them to give any. You basically had a government that couldn't pay its bills or enforce its own laws. So, what happened? Well, this weakness, which they built in on purpose out of that fear of tyranny, it had some pretty disastrous results. The government couldn't pay its own soldiers from the war, which led to a lot of unrest. States started printing their own money, which caused total economic chaos. And to the rest of the world, the new United States kind of looked like a joke, a country that couldn't even manage its own affairs. So after all this, what's the big takeaway? What's the lasting legacy of this, this amazing success followed by a pretty spectacular failure? What did America's first draft really leave us with? Well, first off, the Declaration of Independence. That gave America its soul. It set up this North Star of liberty, equality, and the rights of the people, ideals that we still argue about and strive for today. And then you have the Articles of Confederation. In a way, its failure was one of the most important lessons the new country could learn. It was a real-world experiment that proved, beyond a doubt, that if you want a nation to actually survive, you need a central government that has the power to, well, govern. And that's where the Constitution comes in. You can really think of it as the nation's second draft. It was a direct answer to the first two documents, an attempt to build a government that was strong enough to actually work, unlike the Articles, but was still limited enough to protect the freedoms laid out in the Declaration. And maybe that's the real lesson here, the one that sticks with us. It shows that making progress isn't about getting everything perfect the first time. It's about having the courage to aim for big ideals and having the wisdom to learn from your mistakes. It's a constant process of revision, a national experiment that, in a lot of ways, is still happening today.